a very short presentation, hopefully no more than 15 minutes, in relation to can madrasas open for face-to-face teaching, law and practice. As Dr. Usman has mentioned, we'll be recording it and hopefully, inshallah, publishing the presentation so people can view it at their own leisure, hopefully tomorrow. In relation to this presentation, it's one of a series, so inshallah the idea is to do a second part of this presentation next week on Wednesday at 9 p.m, organised by our brothers Maulana Omar Ganshi from Leicester. So he'll be organising the Zoom meeting at that time. I'm going to be making 7 points, and I'll be referring my last slide is about important documentation and best practice as well. I'm asking the question on a legal perspective: can madrasas open for face-to-face teaching? I won't be addressing the question about whether madrasas should be open for face-to-face teaching. That's a judgment call for yourself, taking into account all of the factors. And not going to be, and it's not my expertise to look at issues from a religious perspective. I am a solicitor by profession. So in terms of the question and the issue, the reason why it is important is because there appears to be some confusion and misunderstandings about what the law is, what the regulations say about after-school classes, supervised activities for children. So this is the reason for this presentation. So point 1, the aim is to give some general information about what the regulations say about face-to-face teaching in madrasas, that is supervised activity for children, setting out the current selection criteria for face-to-face teaching at madrasa based on the regulations from the 6th of January 2021 and the 7th of March 2021. I also want to set out the likely selection criteria changes for face-to-face teaching at madrasa based on the government guidance document that's dated the 23rd of February 2021. It's important for madrasa managers and teachers and trustees to be aware of the lockdown easing dates in England. This presentation is about the English regulations. There are differences that relate to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. The lockdown easing dates that have been announced by the Prime Minister are the 8th of March, the 29th of March, the 12th of April, the 17th of May, and the 21st of June. Each easing date is accompanied by a change to the regulation, and these easing dates may change depending upon the infection rates, hospitalisation and deaths. But it's very, very important for trustees, madrasa managers and teachers to read and share and post the regulation, not just the government guidance. And that if there is any conflicts between the regulation and the government guidance, you should follow the regulation, as that's the law. What is also important as an action point for trustees, madrasa managers and teachers is to amend the forms, the risk assessments, to reflect the changes to the regulation. What you also see on this slide also next to the easing dates is when there are expected to be regulatory changes. And I'm going to be referring to that in a number of the points. Point 2, the current nationwide regulations in England for supervised activity for children, that is face-to-face teaching, between the 6th of January 2021 and the 7th of March 2021 are contained in 2 regulations. The first is the one that came into force on the 2nd of December 2021. This was then amended by the second regulation that came into force on the 6th of January 2021, and I'm going to be referring to both of these regulations. But in short, the selection criteria for any out-of-school provider, that is a madrasa, to provide face-to-face teaching, that's supervised activity for children, if it's for children of critical workers, if it's reasonably necessary for parents, carers to go to work, search for work, attend a medical appointment, or for vulnerable children. Now, this point is very important. Generally, regulations which set out a selection criteria is not a license to open as normal to allow all children to be taught face-to-face. But such regulations will allow face-to-face teaching for children selected from the groups referred to in the regulation and expanded upon by the government guidance. What's also important for madrasa trustees, managers and teachers is that they are not police officers. They are not expected to obtain proofs. So if you want to open for madrasa face-to-face teaching and you've got children attending from one of the categories mentioned in the regulation, currently it's critical workers or parents and carers who want to work, who are working or searching for work or attending a medical appointment, or vulnerable children, you're not required to obtain proofs that the parent is a critical worker, the carer is a critical worker, or the parent and carer are searching for work by looking at by obtaining proof, or if the child is vulnerable, to obtain medical certificates and medical notes from the doctor to say that the child is vulnerable. Let me just now turn to the regulation so you can read it for yourself. It's there. The first one is the regulation that came into force on the 2nd of December. And you'll note it says that a gathering is necessary if it's reasonably necessary. Supervised activities for children or other persons who are under the age of 18 on the 31st of August 2020. So the gatherings which allow supervised activities for children are permitted according to the regulation that came into force on the 2nd of December 2020. But remember, this regulation was amended by the regulation that came into force on the 6th of January 2021, and that was the third lockdown. The wording of this regulation, what you're seeing right now, may be the same regulation changes from the 12th of April during the easing timetable, when it's expected that all children will be allowed back to out-of-school settings. The second regulation, the one that's actually in force right now, is this one. And this says, subparagraph 18E, supervised activity for children only applies where the responsible person is described as a critical worker in the relevant guidance, and the later years provision or supervised activities are reasonably necessary to enable the responsible person to work or search for work, to undertake training or education, or to attend a medical appointment or address a medical need. Or, and if you look at the next section, the later years provision or supervised activities are provided for a child described in the relevant guidance as a vulnerable child or young person. And the amended regulation also talks about what guidance people should be referring to, and it says it's entitled Critical Workers and Vulnerable Children who can access school or educational settings, published by the Cabinet Office and the Department for Education and updated on the 5th of January 2021. So if you're opening madrasa now, then you'll need to look at the government guidance. And this is the government guidance. These are the headings. This is what is defined as a critical worker. There are 8 sectors which our critical workers fall under: health and social care, key public services, food and other necessary goods, transport and border, education and childcare, local and national government, public safety and national security, utilities, communication and financial services. And what you'll notice is that one of the children of critical workers are those who are included in are part of religious staff. Now, what's important also to note is that regulations will permit providers to teach vulnerable children. So this is what the government guidance document says about who are vulnerable children and who makes the assessment for vulnerable children. And if I just read it out to you, it says have been identified as otherwise vulnerable by the education provider. Now, education provider is the madrasa trustees, the madrasa manager, the madrasa teachers, and it would therefore benefit from continued full-time attendance. This might include, and then the government guidance highlights a number of examples of who could be included as vulnerable or described as vulnerable for full-time attendance. Full-time attendance is face-to-face teaching. And I've highlighted in bold the three which may relate to those madrasas that seek to teach children face-to-face according to the regulations which allow a selection criteria for vulnerable children. Those at risk of becoming NEET, not in employment, educational training. Just on that point there is that many young people are being taught in madrasa to train to be those who lead Salah during Ramadan. There are those students who are being trained for higher religious learning and education in order to seek and to get employment. So Hafiz classes, those classes that relate to that lead to employment or further education would be considered to be if they're going to have difficulties and challenges by going into those employment education training, then they are classed as vulnerable. Also highlighted in bold, you'll see, is those who may have difficulty engaging with remote education at home, for example, due to a lack of devices or quiet space or study. And then the final one in bold is others at the provider and the local authority's discretion. Again, I want to emphasize the provider, the manager, the teacher, the madrasa trustee has the discretion to identify those who can attend to receive support or manage risks to their mental health. So what I've highlighted is who are critical workers and who could be vulnerable children and how they may apply to madrasa. But basically, I want to emphasize the importance of the idea of vulnerability is not something that should be strictly understood, but it's something that is assessed by a parent, the carer, or even by the provider themselves, and whether the child or the young person feels that they are having difficulties managing their own mental health. Point three is from the 8th of March 2021, the government guidance then sets out changes to guidance for parents and carers of children attending out-of-school settings during the coronavirus outbreak. So what I've done here then is I've looked at the government guidance and I've copied and pasted basically the bit from the government guidance. And the government guidance gives you an idea, an indication of what might happen in the future next week as to what the regulations will say. And I've highlighted in bold that it says it should only offer indoor and outdoor face-to-face provision to vulnerable children and young people, or other children where the provision is reasonably necessary to enable their parents and carers to work, search for work, undertake education and training, or to attend a medical appointment or address a medical need or support group. Then if I go to point 4, from the 29th of March 2021, again, the same government guidance sets out some of the changes that might take place on the 29th of March. Again, it's pretty much the same as from the 8th of March onwards, indoor provisions to vulnerable children and young people, and other children where the provision is reasonably necessary to enable their parents and carers to work, search for work, undertake education or training, or attend a medical appointment or address a medical need. Point 5 is from the 12th of April 2021, the government guidance sets out changes. And here it says in the italics, the government intention is then for out-of-school settings and wraparound childcare providers to be able to offer provisions as normal to all children from the start of the school summer term. And what I've noted here is it's expected that the madrasa will be allowed to provide face-to-face teaching for all children based on changes to regulation from the 12th of April. This will remove the restrictive permission or selection criteria which existed prior to the 12th of April, which is only for vulnerable children, or to allow parents and carers to work or search for work and attend medical appointments. Point 6 is the government guidance does not set out any expected changes to supervised activities for children out of school settings from the 17th of May. However, it's expected from the 21st of June 2021 that nationwide and local restrictions are due to end, and that includes possibly class bubbles, face coverings, etc. But I've also noted that lockdown easing dates may change depending on infection rates, hospitalizations, and deaths. So these dates may move and change. Point 7 is, remember, whatever the regulation says is permitted, please factor into the decision making for face-to-face teaching, students' health, members of the students' families' health, any local and venue specific outbreaks, any local infection rates, hospitalizations and deaths, any variants, UK variants, South African variants, etc. And what I've also said is that you should try to demonstrate that you've factored in the above in your risk assessments and any parent care reforms that you complete. Also implement precautionary measures, including class bubbles, ventilation, social distancing. Face coverings is recommended according to the Gov Guidance for indoor for years 7 and above, and teachers, unless social distancing can be maintained. And then the final point is this: important documentation and best practice. So point 1 is, please update risk assessments to reflect the changes in the regulations. I've tried to identify what I think will be the selection criteria for madrassas to allow children in particular time periods during the easing of lockdown. So from the 6th of January 2021 to 7th of March 2021, madrassas should be able to, the selection criteria for are to provide education for children of critical workers or parents and carers who are looking for work or working, or who've got medical appointments, or for vulnerable children. From the 8th of March 2021 right through to the 11th of April 2021, the expected selection criteria is going to be for parents and children of parents and carers looking for work or working, or who have medical appointments, or who are vulnerable children. And then from the 12th of April 2021 to the 20th of June 2021, it's expected that the selection criteria ends, and that there doesn't need to be any assessment as to the children attending the madrasa, and it can be all children. And then from the 21st of June 2021, regulations and government guidance are expected to come to an end. That is class bubbles and face coverings, etc. Point 2 is to complete parent care reforms to meet the criteria for face-to-face teaching post the 8th of March 2021. And I prepared a template form, electronic form for madrasas to complete. And I can share that with you on the WhatsApp groups when I'll send a copy of that. Point 3 is, this is my own personal view and opinion as best practice. You should compile a list of students learning remotely and those face-to-face, and try to explain why you are teaching those children face-to-face rather than remote learning. Point 4 is to arrange training with staff, including with specialists. There's a lot of specialist organisations and individuals who provide training, and you can update your training records because you've attended the training. My only concern about some of the things I have read and seen posted is that sometimes the messaging when it comes to the law is not correct and is confusing and is inconsistent with the regulation. Please go back to the regulation, whether that's discussing matters with the local authority, the local authority's resilience teams, police officers, organisations, and etc. Point 5 is, again, best practice. Notify the police and local authority of the madrasa is open for face-to-face teaching and remote teaching if that's what you're doing. Again, there's a draft template letter I've prepared, and I'll share that on the various WhatsApp groups I'm part of, so you can see that. And it's basically there, so if the madrasa does open for face-to-face teaching and there's children going in and out of the madrasa, that if there are any reported complaints, that they are dismissed as soon as possible, because you've already notified the police and local authority that madrasa is open for face-to-face teaching. it just avoids unnecessary hassle. Point 6 is to advise and educate others where there is a miscommunication about the law, and that also includes the local authority, the local authority resilience teams, public health officials, police officers. It also includes sometimes Muslim organisations who get the law wrong, and challenge any inappropriate or discriminatory actions where there is maybe a feeling in an area where the local authority is only inspecting masjids and madrassas and not other providers of out-of-school settings. And you should expect umbrella organisations to show open support for masjids and madrassas which have decided, taking into account all the things, including the law, to open for face-to-face teaching. Point 7 is consider subscribing to Community Legal Education. I post pretty much every week on my YouTube channel, and I do things on COVID-19 laws and regulations, and I put out one today about mass school testing. And please watch and share my short videos on my Facebook page, which I target for Muslim communities in the UK and England specifically. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching the presentation. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the work that you're doing in the madrasas, teaching children remotely. And if you are teaching children face-to-face, thank you for that too. May Allah reward you for all the efforts. If you have any queries or questions, then I'll try and answer them. Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair, Brother Nasir, for your thorough presentation as always. Jazakallah khair. And thank you everyone for joining.